Howdy of you delicious people. I'm here today to review the Daredevil 2003 Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner, Colin Farrell, Michael Clark Duncan film. Jon Favreau. Name drop! So, here we are, reviewing this film, letting everybody know you can go into Tubi to otherwise finally see this film. If you have never seen it in your life, and you're just like, when was Ben Affleck ever Daredevil? What the heck is this all about? Because without a doubt, maybe only people know Daredevil from the Netflix show, and that's completely it. What do people keep talking about this Daredevil thing? I don't know. Maybe I should go into the Ben Affleck movie. Oh, wait. Maybe I should go in the show instead. Because people may like the show much more so than the movie. I can say that there's certain characters in this movie that I think are to be better than the actual show, but that is very few and far between. AKA, the only thing good about this movie is probably Bullseye, and I love the fact that we do have Michael Clark Duncan just kind of slinging Daredevil around in this movie, just freaking grabbing him and like chucking him, because I'm like we rarely really have like a powerhouse of a man that is just to grab somebody by like the arm and the leg and like freaking chuck him, and to have him hit this one glass part of a movie. But anyways, pushing on. So Jon Favreau and basically Colin Farrell are really the only comic relief in this film, because everyone else is just deadpan, stiff, whatever. To where I'm just like, man, like, I think Ben Affleck should have been rolling with the jokes. Just, could we get a Matt Murdock that is just like a Joker style, where it's just like, yeah, man. Because we get some puns, some blind puns in here, but I'm just like, anyways. So there is also actually an extended variation of this movie that is to not be seen on Tubi. There's a director's cut. There's also a director's cut for the original Punisher movie, or extended edition of the original Punisher movie. Like, I always say those for either one, to let everyone know that there is a different variation of those films. The Thomas Jane, I think, Punisher movie. I'm probably pronouncing that. But so Daredevil had an extended or director's cut, and so really those there I think are just really two big scenes that are to be added to this movie, that has like Ben Affleck's character Matt Murdock doing more lawyer stuff with Coolio, who's to play this guy named Dante. And so Matt Murdock is to go into Dante and want him to tell them if he is to be innocent or not. And Matt can hear Coolio's heartbeat, and it's like, oh, like, he's innocent, we'll take him on. And so they go and they end up doing his case, and like that's all that really just plays out with that whole thing. Daredevil is also to interrogate some, I think, dirty cop to try and get information upon the Kingpin, to find out that I think it's legit or not. From what I remember from the director's cut, it's been such a long time since actually watching that. Because I just watched this theatrical variation. Kind of an interesting scene, though. Like, if you can catch somehow the extended director's cut, or you can go out of your way to go onto Amazon and just easily buy it. I'm sure it's like trickles of cents probably by now for this film now, because it's been out for too long. 17, 18 years. I'm really dating when this thing is to come out. So, anyways. So, going into Daredevil, there are some lines that I think really you'll remember from Bullseye much more than anybody else. Can I have some more peanuts? Can I have some more peanuts? It sounds like you're saying an inappropriate word, Like if you keep trying to say it, if you keep trying to say peanuts, you'll be saying like something else, seemingly. Um, I wish that they would have some joke in some kind of parody of sorts, let's just say, an X-rated variety that is to just kind of make like, can I have some more? And it'd be like a female variation of Bullseye. I don't know. Where am I going with this? My like my mind went into the gutter, so let's get back out of it. So my apologies. I hope nobody dislikes this video because I made that dirty joke. I apologize. Anyways, so going into this film, God, this movie is like, it gets to the point when it gets fun. Like there's this just slow trickle of like stuff where you're just kind of like, come on, let's go. But then when eventually it picks up, you're like, okay, great. Like let's get to these parts so I can enjoy this movie now. So Matt Murdock by day, Daredevil by night. So really the one kind of fun part of this movie, but also kind of goofy part of this movie, is they really have to dip in a lot of the previous artists that has ever done a Daredevil book in their life. Like we have names being thrown out like Joe Quesada. We have Kevin Smith in here as Jack Kirby. We've had there is a boxing point when Jack's boss is to mention like Bendis and Miller and all these artists who have eventually have been actually artists of Daredevil. And Frank Miller's Daredevil is probably of course the most like well-known probably variation of Daredevil. Like still to this day, a lot of people are like, man, that Miller Daredevil like was so gritty and so dark and so interesting. But I think eventually some people found like some Daredevil books eventually somewhere down the line, especially once bizarrely the Netflix show started to kick off, and then all of a sudden like Daredevil books started to sell again, because of course it's like the retroactive thing of like, hey, let me go and check out a Daredevil book, and then the actual books started to get better and started to get more interesting. So so going into this, yeah, there's a bunch of names being thrown around that are all actual artists. Frank Miller was to easily die within screen. You just see like a pen going into his head, and he gets killed over by Bullseye, which is to immediately tell us that like Frank Miller was to be killed off in yet another movie. Man, every time Frank Miller is to be tied to a film, he's always to get immediately killed off within scene. Just be like, oh, Frank Miller like was involved in this, because I could easily know because he's a guy to die quickly for whatever reason. Like, man, if you spot Miller in one thing, like go and try to find him in a number of others, you just see him die fairly quickly in everything that he's in. So it's always hilarious. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting way to also start this movie, because a way in which that this movie is to start is to basically have us get to some point and then all of a sudden go all the way backwards to the very origin of this character, but then eventually lead all the way back to that one scene, which I think the first time that I saw this was like, okay, so they went with the cool visual like right out of the gate, because of course that is like an homage to one of the Daredevil comic books. But then I was just kind of like, okay, like this is a weird way to, I think the very first time I ever saw this film was like, this is a weird way to set up this film. I'm like, how am I supposed to know who this Daredevil is? And you're going to go back to you're going to go back to the beginning. Just give me this weird setup. And then all of a sudden just like, yeah, before I guess you're supposed to die, you end up seeing your entire life flash before your eyes. It's weird, even for a blind man. So, how does he know he's going to die? Like, is this the only, like, is that the reason why they didn't make Daredevil 2? Because technically, he died after the first one, and we just didn't know. They killed him off screen. Is there going to be a Daredevil 2 eventually somewhere down the gate, and it's a completely different Daredevil? Because it's like, oh, Elektra just went and just became Daredevil because maybe that's the Elektra movie. She became Daredevil. Maybe she's just telling everybody, hey guys, you can call me Elektra, but also just in hushed tones, also call me Daredevil. Because Matt died in the other movie. Oh, but no, wait. Like, that might, like, me talking about the Elektra movie. The Elektra movie exists. Let's be honest. An Elektra movie exists. I'm not gonna not, like, this may feel like spoilers, but there's an Elektra movie that does exist. Whether it's to be a prequel of the existing Daredevil movie, where it's to show her backstory leading up to the Daredevil moment, or whether it's to be something afterwards, which... Sure. Anyways, so these movies have been out far too long. Everyone should know this by now. It should be common knowledge that these things exist out in the ether. Maybe it's a prequel movie. You don't know. It's not a prequel movie. Anyways, so these things have been out far too long. Almost 20 some odd years these movies have been out. So, like, forgive me if I just want to just say, just confirming. Anyways, because people have probably never seen this movie and gone into like, oh, he spoiled that someone was to just be dead in this film, maybe, and could be Bullseye, could be Kingpin, could be Elektra, could be Daredevil. Everyone could have died in the end of this movie because they didn't make another one, technically. Anyways, so... yeah, I've been talking for far too long about this in cryptic-like sense. Let's bust out that double five, because it's otherwise that time again to go into spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about the time we get to spoil this movie. I apologize for how long the cryptic sense took, but freaking who knows how long it's going to take to get this whole thing done. Hopefully within the X amount of time that this movie actually was. Let's get this done in like 40 minutes. I hope. So, that's my target way of doing things. So, beginning of movie. Spoilers now. So, Matt Murdock, or Daredevil, is to try and sneak into Father Everett's church to try and buy some time from some threat of sorts, let's just say, because this is beginning of film. And so, Father Everett is to just, like, grab this guy's helmet and take it off. I'm like, what? Like, I think the very first time I saw this movie, I'm like, what? We just have random father just going like, Matthew. Like, are you okay, son? Like, what? This guy knows Matt's freaking the devil? The Daredevil? What the is going on? What is this movie? I think the very first time I, like, watched this, I was like, what's going on here? I'm so confused. Daredevil is, like, holding on to this cross, and then he, like, slinks down into this building with his trusty, like, devil gun, or Gatling devil gun of a thing. Whatever that thing was called. I don't know the Daredevil gadget barrage of things. I probably should have figured that out, but anyways, his devil sticks, let's just say. His devil sticks. So Daredevil is to be having his mask taken off. And so Matt is to say, like, well, since I'm to be close to death, I might as well just go back into looking at the origin story of my life, because that's what happens when you're near death. You want to have your whole entire life flash before your eyes. Like, so I'm like, but wait a minute, like, Daredevil wasn't birthed out of anybody in this film, so it technically wasn't the very beginning. Like, I would have wanted to see baby Murdock, because let's just kill a ton of time in this movie. So no, the real focus here is to showcase when Matt was to get his toxic blast to blind himself. So the early beginning of this movie is to have us be in Hell's Kitchen, which is to have been renamed, I think, Lincoln or something like, or Clinton or some weird name now, which I think they retcon that to always be that, dude, it's freaking Hell's Kitchen. I'm not gonna call it anything else. So let me reset here. I had to re-sit in my chair for a little bit here. Anyways, pushing on. So Murdoch is to go off and have to be bullied by these kids. And so these kids are to give Murdoch crap because supposedly Jack is to have worked for Fallon, and Fallon had pushed Jack to go and work at the docks. And Murdoch is like, no, man, no. That's not what he's doing. Like, that's not true. So, Matt ended up getting beaten up because of all this. And so Matt is to go home to eventually kind of like wake up his drunken father, who was to, of course, be a prize fighter. He had the name of Jack Jack the Devil Murdoch. I was like, the Murdoch, Jack the Devil Murdoch, because he used to fight like the devil. So Jack wakes up to eventually see a fight that is going on, and he is to just kind of mention that the boxers that are on the TV he used to beat, guys named Sharp or something like that, mentioning how he used to TKO them a lot and take them down. So Jack is to, of course, see the bruising upon Matt's face, and so it's like, hey, where'd you get that from? Like, hey, you don't hit nothing but books. And so Matt is like, well, yeah, but they were telling me that you were going and working for Fallon again. And Jack is like, no, I'm working down at the docks. So Matt, I guess, with his report card in hand of all bajillion A's, I guess was to go and see his father to just like, hey, Dad, you proud of me? I got all A's. So Matt is to go off to the docks to greet his father, and the whole reason why he's going there is because that'll be the last thing he ever sees. So Matt goes off, runs to where his dad is to find out that his dad is squeezing people for money. Jack had lied, mentioning that he had been doing doubles down at the docks. Really, his doubles were to beat the crap out of people for money. So Jack is still like a, what is the perfect word, loan shark, or kind of like what John Travolta was or Stallone kind of was in the Rocky film, until eventually he decided to just actually be a boxer instead of boxing people up for money, so to speak, beating the crap out of them for money. So after Matt is to see that his father is lying to him, Matt runs off to get some splash of toxic waste upon his eyes. And so later on, Matt is to wake up in the hospital with these bandages over his eyes. And all of a sudden now Matt is to hear the world. You would have thought that like Matt would have woken up so much more sooner than that. Immediately once he is to have this like water wave hit him of sound that is to have him just hearing all kinds of things. So Matt is to wake up to eventually just be hearing car sounds, be hearing like street signs, to be hearing all kinds of things, like people walking in front of him that aren't actually there. And he is just so frightened and he doesn't understand what all is going on, because all these sounds are all hitting him at once. And so he had to figure out a way to master this whole thing, or otherwise, like, he wouldn't be able to figure out what the heck is going on at all points in time. To where he kind of over the years has become like the equivalent of Clark Kent's Superman, where like Clark had to adapt to Earth's atmosphere and try to rein in, like, to focus probably on one sound to muffle everything out. Maybe that's what he ended up doing. As far as this way of doing things, maybe he had super smelling to where you can like hear somebody fart from like 3 floors down, and like he's like, I keep smelling farts everywhere I go, everywhere. I can't stop smelling the farts. You would have thought that this guy would have just rammed like things into his nose, just like, I don't want to super smell anybody. But yeah, supposedly in the comic books, Matt's sense of touch is to have been so sensitive that he could feel the lettering on any kind of page of any book to be able to know what the book was to say. But I don't know if they worked that into here or not, but they eventually shifted it to him just kind of reading Braille, and like, okay, all right. So Jack is to see Matt and just be like, I'm sorry, Matty. I'm so sorry that I lied to you. And you're blind for the rest of your life now because I pretty much scarred you for life. Like, what if the moment was that Matt was to go there and his father was to do a horrible thing that Matt saw, and Matt didn't need to get splashed with the toxic waste? What if just that thing alone just bizarrely just made Matt blind, but all of his other powers just kicked in still, and it wasn't this toxic waste of a thing? Maybe that scarred image alone just bizarrely changed Matt's body forever. And that would have been a much more interesting part of this movie rather than the sploosh of toxic waste. Because I think that would have sold people a lot more in an interesting way than, like, there would be some kind of psychological, like, thing that people could try to figure out if that could be a possibility. And that would lead to a much more interesting film. So Jack, because of what had happened with Maddie, Jack decided it's like, well, hey, like, you know what? Like, I'm going to do the right thing because Matt has always wanted me to do the right thing, and I always went the easy route. So Jack decided that he is going to go back into boxing because both Jack and Matt had made a promise to one another that they're both fighters on a comeback trail. And so if Matt's going to learn how to adapt to this world, then Jack is going to relearn how to fight again so that way he can go and knock some folks out. So that way, instead of going and working with Fallon, he can go and be a boxer and knock people out. So while Jack is kind of like sneaking off to go and drink or go fight or whichever, Matty is deciding to train his body to eventually go and hit the bag every once in a while, the boxing bags or whatever, and eventually just try to train his body and to smack against the sound so that we can see what things are. And all of a sudden, Matt is to have become a kid without fear. And because that's always the thing. The man without fear is like, they write songs about it. They have it be a comic book name for the longest time. That Daredevil, the man without fear. And like the whole queuing up of this movie is to have Kingpin tell Bullseye eventually somewhere down the road, like, well, how can you kill a man who has no fear? And Bullseye's like, by putting the fear in him. And it's like, oh, okay, all right. But let's push on. So, uh, so of course, what happens is Matt is to go and I guess do this big fight, and all of a sudden Fallon comes in. And he's like, "Hey, Jack, yeah, you're gonna go down in round 3 or whatever round." And so Jack is like, "I don't work for you no more." And Fallon's like, "Jack, you never stopped." It's like Bendis, Miller, like all these other fighters, like I pay them to go down for you. Like, think about it, Jack. You're 42. Like, come on, buddy. Like, you really think that you could have taken these guys down all upon your own? Really, Jack? So, Jack goes on and is to have supposedly thrown this fight, but he doesn't. Because Matt is in the audience, like, wearing Jack's robe, and Matt is like, "Get up, Dad! Yeah!" Like, we never give up, remember, Dad? Like, it's kind of interesting because how is it that Maddie knows that his dad is down if he's blind? Like, was somebody whispering him sweet nothings of telling him what's going on? Then I could have justified that, but like maybe like Matt was a really good guesser, weirdly, at that point in time, let's just say. But I know that Matt could hear the sound of the punches, and I know that probably could tell because of the sounds. But it's just an interesting kind of thing for me. So Jack gets up, of course, to instead of losing this fight, Jack goes, punches the other guy out, knocks him out, and so I remember in the Daredevil show where Jack is kind of like just scrambling, and he ends up making some phone calls to try to make sure that Maddie is being taken care of. And like Jack, before the fight was already started, already knew that he was going to win this match, even though he wasn't supposed to. Where in this movie, like Jack just does it because Matt kind of inspires him to. So Jack is to be beaten up and to be left for dead, and a rose to be tossed upon his body. Matt is to find his dead body and toss the robe of Jack's aside to hold on to his father, and Matt is to just be crying because he's like, "I can't see you, Dad, I can't see you," and freaking grabs the rose and squeezes it tight. I'm kind of curious, like, what happened seemingly for Matt after that. Like, did he end up just kind of going through foster care, or like, cause it seems that they don't go through like they never go through the moment of afterwards where we find out that Matt had a secondary family. Maybe the comic books cover it, but I don't know. Did the people in the neighborhood just take care of him? Did anybody in the boxing community just like kind of just take him and just, hey, like, did Stick take him after that moment? Was that the moment where Stick took him and trained him supposedly in this film? The part that we didn't see? We can only hope. So, we transition to have Matt, who is to go and do this case against this guy named Joe Quesada. And her client is to mention that Joe Quesada's character had taken advantage of her. And Joseph Quesada had mentioned it's like, well, this girl was wanting some fun and like it was all consensual. And so Matt is just like, you know what? Like, I hope justice has been found for you today, or maybe some other time it will. Uh, like we have kind of Matt mentioning how justice is blind, but like it can see here today, and all this kind of rigmarole that you always have to kind of go with Matt. And, like every single statement has to kind of play up the fact that Matt is blind to just kind of get this sympathy thing where there might be a judge or a jury that is to go on the side of Matt because he is to be blind. I think in the Coolio scene, there was to be a point where Matt was to try and play up him being blind for the people. Or I think Matt was to either trip or fall or to smack into something, from what I remember. And Matt was eventually to turn to Favreau or Foggy to just say, like, hey man, do you think it was a little too far when I, like, kind of fell there? Like, Foggy was like, no, I think they bought it. Like, I think the sympathy was there. So, Joseph Quesada ended up getting off scot-free because he had a lawyer named Hirsch. Hirsch was to mention about Ben Affleck's client that there is something suspect about her, and so Murdoch said, and kind of it's like, well, hey, like, why is it that any part of my client is to be suspect? I guess supposedly she might have had a history in some kind of drugs or some kind of things that would kind of make her accusations inaccurate. I guess probably Quesada probably picked the right girl to go after because there's a history there, meaning history of just you maybe cannot buy this person 100%. So Quesada gets off scot-free, and so now Foggy is to mention how is it exactly that Quesada could fit a bill for Hirsch. Like, that seems very high-end lawyer. And Murdoch is like, well, of course, because this alleged kingpin had probably fit the bill. Whoever this character is, whether he goes into a Neptune song and is like, dirty down, da 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 da, yeah, that freaking intro of that character is freaking awesome. So, Murdoch is like, well, you know what? Like, I have work to do tonight. And you know what? You know what I would have wanted to just had Foggy said, I'm like, hey, what work are you doing? Like, don't you usually work with me? Like, it seems that Matt has his own thing to do a lot of the times. It's like, what work are you doing? What research are you doing? Like, what's going on there? It seems like we're not getting this, like, other extra source of income coming in whatever you're doing. So, what are you doing? What are you doing, Murdoch? So, Matt goes off to turn into Daredevil. And, we also get this spot where Father Everett was to have a confession be done with Murdoch. And so, of course, Father Everett knows what's going on. And Father Everett's like, well, you need permission to do what you're doing, and I can't give that to you. And no matter how many times you can confess, and no matter how many times that you do what you're doing, like, I'm never going to, like, give you an acceptance to hurt people. It just is wrong. But Father Everett kind of gives him, like, the kind of, like, say Hail Marys and just kind of, like, go about your day. And also, like, Father Everett's like, yeah, and I also don't like the costume either. And so Matt's like, ha ha. Because it's a devil. It's supposed to strike fear in the hearts of men. It's supposed to be a symbol. Anyways, like, I don't know why they actually come to the point of Daredevil. Like, why is it that Matt Murdock is to be dressed like a Daredevil? Like, I can understand a man without fear, but I could probably much more understand if, like, Matt Murdock had, like, Johnny Blaze's backstory, and then he went blind during that point of time, and then, like, he just kept the Daredevil persona, And that actually would have made a lot of sense. Like if they played it out like the Johnny Blaze way for Daredevil instead of the boxer thing, the boxer angle. They could have broken it down the exact same way. Have one of Johnny Blaze's dad's tricks just kind of go off to where it kills the guy. It's like, ooh, we got to find out who his killer was. That could be an interesting. That could have been an interesting Daredevil kind of movie. To have him have like a Johnny Blaze kind of story. But anyways, check out the Ghost Rider Nicolas Cage movie. It's pretty good. I enjoyed it. So Daredevil goes off to this bar, where of course there's to be this Nickelback song playing, which is actually pretty good in the soundtrack. I played the soundtrack I don't know how many numerous times. Actually, some pretty decent songs in there. For some of the point, maybe every once in a while you just hear a song where you're just like, but a lot of the songs I think hit pretty good for that soundtrack. But it's quite a while ago, so maybe I'm thinking that those songs are good, and people are just like, oh, these songs are garbage. What is this? Anyways, so Daredevil makes it to this bar. All of a sudden, there's to be one guy who's just spot like, hey, look at that. And Joseph Quesada is like, hey, is that guy legit? Looks pretty real. So all of a sudden, we have Daredevil kind of like devil sticking his way from off this fan to just kind of go and try to attack these guys, try and smack these guys around. This spot here, this fight out spot in this bar, is actually pretty interesting. But like, there's so much darkness being presented in this scene to just kind of like just say like, hey, hopefully we get everything wrong or correct here because darkness. So they're really holding on to the shadows and really just kind of holding on to there probably not being a lot of people in this actual bar where Ben Affleck actually has to fight them. So Ben Affleck is sticking people, smacking people, clobbering people with his devil sticks. And I'm sure there's some goofy name for this devil sticks. They're to be called batons, or they're to be called dare sticks. dare whatever, like devil devil batons. I don't know what they're actually called. Whatever the actual name is, because I didn't check this out because I didn't take the time. So Joseph Quesada is to run off, and Daredevil is surely behind him. We get this spot where Quesada falls over to kind of just spit out some blood. Because there's to be this one spot where Murdoch is to pop out one of this guy's teeth. So Quesada falls over to just see in the water reflection like Daredevil is just going to go and jump down in front of him. So Quesada's running for his life, running to this subway, and so Matt Murdock is to get to the bottom of the stairs and to smack the stairwell to just kind of get this echo to see where this guy actually is. So Murdoch is to, of course, use his devil sticks to go and have this one stretch of line being fed, holding Quesada's neck. So Murdoch appears to him like, hey, how's it going? Like, how you doing? Quesada mentions, like, well, hey, like, didn't you hear in the bar, like, I was quitting? And Murdoch is like, well, like, you didn't quit for me. Like, you didn't quit, like... So, what ends up happening is Murdoch is to toss Quesada, having his legs being broken. Or no, wait. Before that happens, there's to be a spot where Murdoch is to hear one of the trains come by, and he falls over and he's like, ah, and then Quesada is to have a gun and almost is to like kind of like pull the bullet to where it almost hits Murdoch, but instead, Murdoch is to disarm Quesada and kind of crack this guy's legs, toss him over to the side, and so Murdoch is to tell Quesada before he is to inevitably die, because this train is coming, another train. Murdoch tells Quesada, it's like, hey, that light that you're seeing at the end of the tunnel, it's not heaven, it's a sea train. Freaking and kills him off. So Matt is to, of course, transition. Matt goes to this coffee shop with Favreau, with Foggy. So they're talking about the alligators in the sewers. They're also talking about, supposedly, there is to be an artist rendering Daredevil, I guess, supposedly, but it looks grotesque or whatever. I don't know. There's 2 spots of this that are to happen. I think the actual artist rendering of Daredevil maybe happens in the second half of this movie. But there's always this conversation about the alligators in the sewers both times. So Favreau is to mention that there's alligators in the sewers, and Matt is just like, it's just a myth. Like, there's no way that's true. But there is a guy who is to be able to corroborate that story, and of course that is to be Ben Urich, which bizarrely, in the photo of which that is to be Ben Urich, is to be some animated character. Great! So if anybody looks this guy up, you just see some goofy animated character. But I should have remembered Urich because like he's been kind of a staple for the Daredevil comic books. Really, I think Urich has kind of probably been better done maybe in the Daredevil comic books, but you could probably say probably the show probably does a better job because his character is just kind of there. But it seems that in this movie, Ben Urich is to be the only one that is to seemingly find out who Daredevil and Matt Murdock is eventually in the story. Eventually. So Matt Murdock and Foggy are exchanging about the alligators and the sewer story. Murdock is to stop Foggy in his tracks because he gets a whiff of something. All of a sudden, that whiff is to be Electra Nachios. Or Electra Nachos. Can I get some more of that? Anyways. She comes blazing into this coffee spot, and so here's the interesting part. Where Foggy and Murdock were having this debate about the alligators in the sewers, like, Matt was irritating Foggy, so Foggy goes and puts mustard in Murdock's drink, and while Foggy wasn't paying attention, Murdock switched the drinks, and so Murdock goes over to Elektra and is to ask her, like, excuse me, miss, could I have a thing of honey? Or could I have some honey? And Elektra is like, well, it's right in front of you. And Murdock is like, well, like, could you actually, like, could you hand it to me or something? And she's like, it's right in front of you. And he's like, well, I can't tell that. And she's like, well, why? And he's like, because I'm blind. It's like, oh. So Elektra is to go and give him the honey and just like, okay, here you go. So all of a sudden we have Foggy who takes a take, and Elektra is like, oh, is he like a friend of yours? And Murdock's like, I've never seen him before. I've never seen him before in my life. So Murdock is trying to continue to talk to Elektra, but it seems that Elektra is going to give this guy no never mind. So Matt Murdock goes back and sits down, and Elektra leaves. So Murdock is deciding, you know what, I'm going to leave too. Like, I'm going to go and file an appeal, meaning I'm going to go after that woman, kind of see if I can get, like, her name, her number, and just, like, just really just impress this woman because I'm blind, but I could still can technically see. So Foggy's mentioning about their court date. Murdoch's like, yeah, yeah. So Matt goes off to follow Elektra, and so Elektra is like, hey man, why are you following me? And it's kind of funny because later on in the movie, eventually Elektra goes and follows Murdoch. So it's just kind of funny how, like, we kind of foreshadow that they're gonna bizarrely continue to stalk one another. But it's kind of funny that both of them are to be able to end up, like, know one another stalking them. So Elektra and Matt are now to be at this playground, and so Elektra is starting to strike Matt, and then she's like, "Are you sure that you can't see?" And Matt's like, "Yeah, I can't see." So they start fighting it out, and Matt is to tell Elektra, it's like, "You're holding back." She's like, "Yeah," and he's like, "Don't." So I'm just gonna start doing this weird, bizarre, like dance number thing with you while fighting, which is just so weird. But all the kids are just like, yeah, they're fighting, yeah, get them, whoever you are, people. So Matt and Elektra just fight it out, like they're going on the teeter totters. Matt's a walking stick is getting chucked into this one bench, and they're just all over the place. They're flinging around, they're flipping around. Uh, Lecture's just like, why do all of this to try to get my name? You probably should actually try to get my number. So Matt gets his clock cleaned, pushing him to now sit his butt down on this bench, and so Elektra is to hold out her leg to have this seemingly final strike. And Elektra is just like, well, my name is Elektra Nachios. Like, I don't like the that she does after that. It's so just like, okay. Uh, so, uh, let's transition to Wilson Fisk. So, Wilson Fisk is to be at this highest building that can possibly be built for this man. And so Wesley is to come to Fisk and to tell Fisk, hey, it seems like people are talking. It seems like word is getting out about the Kingpin. And Fisk is like, well, that's the whole thing. Like someone always does. Someone always does squeal. Someone always talks. So let's easily transition this movie to like seemingly some important parts that eventually will lead further on into this movie. So Fisk is to go and talk to Nicholas Nachios, and Nicholas Nachios is to be like, hey man, I want you to buy me out. Like, I want to be out of Hell's Kitchen. I'm like, I am out. Am I, Fisk? And Nicholas is like, yeah, like, or Fisk is like, yeah, man, you're out. Like, you're out. Maybe. Maybe you won't be out alive. So Nicholas just wants out of this town. He wants no piece of what's going on here, getting it out of here. So that transitions us to having this big la-di-da banquet of a thing. I'm going to reset here. Give me a second. All right. Normally I'd pause this, but meh, whichever. We're already in like 50 minutes in. and I said that hopefully I can get it done in 40, but like we're already not even like a quarter way through this film, but I want to try to speed this up as much as possible. So we had this Lottie Dog gala because Elektra is to eventually go and re-find Murdoch, and like Elektra is stalking Murdoch, and Murdoch's like, "Hey, like I can tell that that's you. Like muggers don't have 10-inch heels and smell like how you smell." So Matt and Murdoch, or Elektra and Murdoch, go to the top of this building, and Murdoch is to tell Elektra that, hey, it's going to rain soon. I know I can smell it in the air. Like, if anything, if it is to rain, I can see you for the first time and see what you actually look like. So rain pours down. He can see what she looks like. She's like, ah, and he's like, ah, you're beautiful. Because of course you are, because you're freaking Jennifer Gardner. It's kind of interesting how young Jennifer Garner looks in this movie. That's a horrible thing to say, but it's true. It's true. Anyways, plus, like, man, how like much like Jennifer Garner had to do in this movie also, because not everyone can wear a mask in this film. Probably hence why like Colin Farrell was like, I want a bloody costume so that we could wear a freaking costume. So. After Fisk was to talk to Nicholas, he was to mention like, "Hey, give me Bullseye." So eventually, we're gonna get that. We're gonna set that up. So Matt and Elektra go out in the rain, and so that leads for them to have some seemingly banging out business. There's to be one spot that I completely skipped about in the early part of this where Matt was to get dumped by his girlfriend via this message where she's like, where do you go at 3 in the morning? Like, Matt, you're never there. So, like, I've just realized that now that you're never there. So, I'm leaving you. And we just see Matt getting out of the tub and going off and playing some loud music after hearing his messages. Uh, so Matt goes on and like sleeps with Elektra, of course. So Matt is to get this engraved notice about having to go to this party, and Foggy also got the notice as well. So Matt is almost just kind of tempted to just want to break up with Elektra, like not really be involved with her, just easily break up with her. And that's not exactly how things were to easily just break down. So Matt goes to this gala, this party, because Foggy desperately wants to go, because he's like, hey man, like, I'm a +1. I'm not some la-di-da guy that's gonna go in there by myself. So both Matt and Foggy go in there to try to to get some big rich people to be a part of their part of what they're doing, but no one's gonna care about two supposedly blind lawyers, as Fisk is to mention, when he's to greet him at this place. Fisk meets both Matt and Foggy and say, "Hey, you're the blind lawyers from Hell's Kitchen." And Matt is like, or Foggy's like correcting him. It's like, well, he's blind. I'm deaf. So Matt is to say, it's like, well, we're never going to work with Fisk because we only work with the innocent. And Fisk is like, well, one thing that I've learned is no one's ever innocent. So transition. So Murdoch is to have Elektra be waiting for him at this top of the stairwell. Foggy's to spot Elektra and just be like, hey, Matt, I wish I could give you my eyes for one night. And Murdoch's like, it's like that. And Foggy's like, it's like that. Foggy's to think that he is to need to help Murdoch to get up those stairs, but Foggy is noticing that Murdoch is already just ninja vanished to make his way up the stairs himself. It seems like there's a variety of certain kind of hefty smells, like cigarette smells or cigar smells, perfumes, so on. And so Murdoch makes it to Elektra. And so Elektra and Murdoch make it to the dance floor. Elektra wants to take Murdoch's sunglasses off, which Murdoch is like, well, it could be uneasy for other people to see me like this. And Elektra's like, well, I want to see what your eyes look like. F it. Elektra is to mention that the only reason why she looked as good as she was to look tonight is for Murdoch's benefit. But, like, Murdoch can't see, but I guess he can just feel. Just feel the power of the Elektra. Nachios. So, really, Nachios is to talk with Fisk, and Fisk is to mention to Nicholas, like, hey, like, I haven't seen her this happy since before her mother was killed. And Nicholas is like, hey, like, why are you bringing that up? And Fisk is like, just saying goodbye, old friend, just saying goodbye. Like, and putting a rose in your suit, which basically means you're gonna die soon. Nachios is just like, hey, we're getting out of here. Elektra spots that. She runs off with him into his car. Elektra is wanting to know exactly why her father is so spooked. Nachios is just to mention that that tonight is just seemingly an unsafe place for him to be. So now, let's set this up. Let's talk about Bullseye. So, Bullseye, the first thing that we see him is to be at this bar where he was to seemingly not get paid for him playing darts and playing darts severely well. And so the guy was going to be like, well, get out of the bar free. And Bullseye was like, give me that money. The guy pays him. Bullseye walks off and mentions this other guy at this bar mentioned some like crappy comment. So Bullseye is to bust up this paper clip. And the guy's like, huh? So all of a sudden Bullseye just goes and flings these little paper clips into this guy's neck, killing him over. And he just walks off. So Bullseye now has to fly all the way to where Fisk needs him to be. And during this plane ride, we have this old lady that is talking about one of her family members that made some like goofy thing on the internet really successful, and that she had gotten a laptop for Christmas or something, or a computer for Christmas. And so Bullseye just gets so annoyed with this woman that he ends up taking this little peanut and flings it to where it like ricochets and hits her in the throat, which makes her choke and keel over. I'm like, wait a minute, couldn't she have just or something that could have just led her to like just choke this down or something? I guess not. So maybe it went so fast that it just destroyed her heart on the way down. I don't know. That sounds weird. So this girl just kind of keels over, and the stewardess is like, "Oh, she's sleeping," and she's like, "Do you want anything else? Some more peanuts?" If I say it the other way, it sounds like an inappropriate word. Anyways, so pushing on, Daredevil makes it to the States, and so is to immediately go and kill one of Fisk's men by putting a pencil through his neck. And so Fisk is to tell Bullseye who all he's supposed to kill, and Fisk is to say like, hey, like put a rose on all of them because signature piece. So like we have Colin who's kind of like kind of doing something weird and goofy with the rose, just kind of have some fun here. And Bullseye is to mention, give me a bloody costume, which he never gets. So, because there was never time. So, now I think we can get up to the current moment where Nicholas is to get killed. So Nicholas in his limousine is to make his way through the streets. Bullseye is to be in his motorcycle and goes and like hops up onto the motorcycle and goes and takes these ninja star like things out of his belt and tosses them and hits the driver and the other bodyguard that Nicholas is to have, stopping the car dead in its tracks. So Daredevil is to know full well that something is going on with Elektra and her family. So Matt changes into Daredevil to just kind of hop over the buildings to just kind of follow this car around. So Daredevil is to try and intercept Bullseye, and so we rationally get the first time ever where Daredevil makes Bullseye miss. Like, he made me miss. So Daredevil is to get his stick, and so these ninja stars to go and fling at him, and we have the spot where Daredevil is to catch every single one of them with his stick. And so I think that eventually leads where he is to take the stick and hit him in the bullseye forehead, and he smacks and falls over. So all of a sudden, Nachios is to come out of his car and be like, hey, what's going on? Ah! And all of a sudden, we have this car that ends up exploding, and Bullseye is to chuck this devil stick, and is to go and stab and kill Nicholas. And Elektra, who's just figuring out what's going on, all of a sudden just sees this devil stick and not much else. So she immediately thinks that Daredevil is to be the one that had killed her father, because that's the only one that she's to see. So this girl, Elektra, goes and fires off this gun, and of course, Daredevil runs off. So the next thing we are leading to is Nicholas Nachios' funeral, where Daredevil is trying to be there for Elektra. And again, like, we get back to the Elektra that is just to be just completely just walled up and stoned off from Daredevil. I think there was also to probably be an extra scene here, maybe in the director's cut, where there might have been a spot more with Matt Murdock and Ben Urich here, but I'm not 100% sure. So there could have been some extra scene, I think, with Ben Urich and Daredevil, but anyways, so Ben Urich is to go on to see Jack Kirby before Nicholas is to have been buried, and Jack Kirby, who is Kevin Smith's character, has the Daredevil weapon, and Ben Urich sees it and he's like, give me the money back, like, I've seen this before. But Jack Kirby is to do the righty-tighty, lefty-loosey, to all of a sudden showcase that this is to have some weird stick of a thing. And Jack Kirby's like, hey, like, anything weird, like, you were to, like, this is weird. And Ben is like, you have no idea. Because then immediately, because Ben was to see Matt and to talk to Matt at this gala where eventually Matt sees Elektra in her good-looking dress, Ben bumps into them and is to drop Murdoch's walking stick, and Ben mentions is like, hey, cool color, and Murdoch's like, yeah, I wouldn't know. So now Ben is like, aha, Murdoch, Daredevil, oh my god. Like, but Ben takes this and is to come to Murdoch and is to really just say it's like, hey, like Elektra isn't safe, and it seems like you probably know Murdoch. You probably know a guy that can keep Elektra safe while jogging at night or whatever. Batman Forever reference. Ding. Fries are done. So, uh, but yeah. So we go through this whole funeral thing, and like Fisk is just watching on as Elektra is to just basically just block freaking Daredevil. And Murdoch is to tell Elektra, stay with me. And she's like, no, no. Like, you're not going to get any rain moment coming anytime soon. Like, you're not gonna really going to try to comfort me because it's just not going to happen. So, Elektra is going to go after her father's killer, which he assumes is Daredevil. So Elektra is going off and training with the Evanescence song playing. Uh, and she's kind of going through all these sandbags and tossing her size into them and kind of doing this weird like flinging thing with her hand, which I'm sure probably like hit herself probably in the face any number of times, probably doing that, or maybe not. Maybe she ended up freaking hurting her hand with all the numerous like rotation things that she was probably doing with these size. Like there probably would have been some probably learning curves to probably those things, because like I'm sure Wolverine like freaking like stabbed himself numerous times with his Wolverine claws while doing any number of movies by accident. Like how many numerous scars that he probably has from like the Wolverine days. That's probably why he didn't want to do them anymore. Just because like, man, I don't want to get it stabbed in the leg 80 bajillion times because I'm not like paying attention to what I'm doing. Like freaking those things hurt every goddamn time. Anyways, so and plus numerous mistakes can happen. Uh, so so Ben is to tell Matt, hey, like the streets aren't safe for Elektra, go and get her. So Matt dusts out his Daredevil costume and is to kind of walk the streets at night, trying to figure out where possible Bullseye is or anybody that eventually could have him have to fight. Oh, we also get this. We also have to get to the spot where, in the early part of this movie, uh, Ben Affleck is beating down this guy, and like we have the spot where, like, hey, uh, you ain't hoarding over the street anymore. Like Kingpin is the new guy here, and so Murdoch is beating down a guy. All of a sudden, he sees this kid, and this kid is like, "Don't hurt me!" And Murdoch is like, "I'm not the bad guy, kid." And then he has that stoic moment where he's off in the rain, and he's like, "I'm not like I'm not the bad guy. I'm not." Anyways, I just wanted to mention that part because I like that part in the movie, even like because it's like the like you have like also the good narration where Murdoch is to say, yeah, there's sometimes I do believe, and then some others where uh like where it's kind of difficult to just kind of keep things going because it's just like it's gonna be a revolving door of criminals eventually just getting free and whatever. So that kind of conundrum that's going on with Matt, where it's just like where he has faith, but then eventually he loses it at some points in time to just think that good deeds will be rewarded or whichever. So pushing on. So Matt goes out. Elektra is to go and attack him and to kind of slice down a lot of these clothes that are just being hung out. Elektra goes, stabs freaking Murdoch in the chest, and she's like, okay, now I want to see the eyes of the man who had killed my father. Takes off his mask. Hey, I'm Murdoch. I was only trying to protect you. It's like, oh crap. So all of a sudden, that's when Bullseye is to appear, and so Elektra is like, oh well, I'll go and get him. Like he'll be like he's mine. So Elektra goes off and goes and chucks the sai at Bullseye for Bullseye to just catch like the sai between his fingers. Bullseye in kind chucks it back at her for her to try to catch it, for her to land it within her hand, like in the middle of her hand, where she's like, ah, and then she pulls it out. So Elektra tries to fight Bullseye, and here's the goofy thing. So Bullseye is beating Elektra with a trench coat. Bullseye is completely taking Elektra down with a trench coat. He's just like kind of smacking her with this trench coat, and that's like taking her down. Like really, that's what his real true defense is a trench coat. Good God. But so eventually Elektra is to be taken down. Bullseye is to just outfight her. And so, of course, we have Bullseye who ends up stabbing through Elektra just like the comic does. And is to, of course, kill her. And Murdoch's like, no! Because that's his woman technically, but she's dead. So Bullseye throws the rose and gets the heck out of there. So Murdoch now has to this is a scene that is to lead up to Murdoch making it to the church, bleeding heavily, because Bullseye is still after Daredevil. So Murdoch makes it to the church, and of course, Bullseye is to take this one like concession stand bowl and is to chuck it at Bullseye, and it hits him in the neck. And Bullseye is to mention like, "Hey, Father, get the heck out of here! You're gonna die just like he will." So Everett puts on Murdoch's mask, and Bullseye goes and Daredevil like readjusts his like neck piece and just so we have this one part where they're to go and fight in these like organs, and so Bullseye starts smacking against these these organs by accident, and all of a sudden Murdoch is to get the vibrations, and he's like, ah, and so Bullseye's like, aha, like I figured it out. And so Murdoch is to just try to, as quickly as possible, get away from where they are and head into this one room. And so Bullseye goes and breaks this whole glass and tries to chuck all these huge glass pieces that he has, like holding in his hand, just chucks it at him, which is such a goofy scene. Daredevil dodges them all, and so eventually this all leads to the spot. Because I'm trying to time this perfectly, whether or not when like Daredevil smacks Bullseye with the stick, because that might have happened during the whole spot with Elektra's father getting killed, or this might happen somewhere here, like from what I remember. But anyways, so we push on, and we have Daredevil being very injured, and so we of course have the spot where Bullseye is to have all these candles, and he's like, I figured out your weakness. Like, I figured out how to put the fear back in you. And Bullseye is to mention that he's like, hey, I got paid for Nicholas, and I got paid for Elektra, but I told Fisk that I do the hat trick. I said that I do you for free. So Bullseye had the candlestick thing, whatever, and he's like, bring on the pain, bring on the noise, and smacks it into this vibrating thing. And then Bullseye tries to go and stab Daredevil, but it seems that bizarrely there is to be this sniper that is out there kind of just seeing shadows in the church. So there's a police officer who's like, hey, if you have a shot, which isn't seemingly the perfect shot, just go ahead and take it. So like they're kind of battling back and forth for this piece. All of a sudden there's to be a shot coming from somewhere that of course Daredevil is to see. Murdoch kind of pushes the piece perfectly to align with the bullet going through Bullseye's hands. And so now we have it where Bullseye's one thing is you took my hands. And so now Bullseye is like, show mercy, like you took my hands. So Murdoch, of course, takes Bullseye, chucks him out this window, goes flying, falling into some car. There's also an extra scene in here where Kingpin and Bullseye are to be in prison, and that's another director's cut scene where you see Kingpin in prison and he's just kind of biding his time, and you see Bullseye who's kind of in this mummified kind of getup, and he's just kind of biding his time also. So Murdoch is to now transition to make it to Wilson Fisk because Bullseye was to naturally assume that Murdoch was going to die. So Bullseye told Daredevil that Wilson Fisk is the Kingpin. Because talking about like how like Fisk's thing was the roses, because Bullseye assumed that he was going to kill Daredevil here, but he didn't. So, especially when he found out his weakness. So Daredevil is to head to Fisk's spot, and Wesley is to kind of give Kingpin a heads up, hey, like it seems like Daredevil's making his way here. And so now, like, Kingpin is kind of prepping, like, getting some, like, parts of his, like, three-course dress thing off to have Wesley just kind of, like, wait a minute, are you actually going to stay here? And Kingpin is like, hey, like, freaking you just don't get it. Like, like, just go on, like, I'll take him, and I'll take him down. Like, don't worry about it. So Daredevil makes his way to Fisk's office, and so now we get a really cool fight scene where like Kingpin is like chucking Daredevil all over the place, kind of flinging him all over the place. It's really cool. Yeah, so we easily have it where Kingpin takes off Murdoch's mask with the Daredevil. He's like, the blind lawyer from Hell's Kitchen. And Murdoch's like, you killed the only two people I ever loved. And so Kingpin is like, well, your father was supposed to throw a fight. Like, I was working for Fallon at the time. And your girl was just in the wrong family at the wrong time. So we have a spot where Daredevil is to figure out there seems to be water coursing through this room weirdly. And so, of course, Ben goes and chucks to hit this part that is to have this water just go all over the place so he can consistently see where Kingpin is. So now, Matt is now fighting off Kingpin, takes him down, freaking breaks his kneecaps, and so Fisk drops the ground. He's like, ah. So Matt is now like, yeah, like freaking, I got you. Like, this is for my dad. And so Murdoch has Kingpin's staff and is almost going to swing at him, but he misses. And Kingpin is like, what are you doing? And Murdoch's like, I'm not the bad guy. And so he chucks his staff. And it's like, hey, the cops are coming. I can hear them. And Kingpin is like, yeah, they're coming for you. And Murdoch's like, no, they're coming for you. They they know that you're coming, that you're the Kingpin now. They figured it out. So they're coming for you. They're not coming for me. I'm sure Bullseye squealed. So they're coming for you. So there's this whole moment where Daredevil's mask is there and there's blood and roses and whatever to just kind of have this artistic moment for this movie, weirdly. So Kingpin is to tell Murdoch, hey, I'll tell them who you are. And Murdoch's like, no one's going to believe that a blind lawyer took you out and any number of people. No one's going to believe you. And Kingpin's like, well, then, I'll get out and I'll be coming. And Murdoch's like, I'll be waiting. I'll be waiting for you. So now the last thing for Murdoch to do is to take this rose and to toss it onto the spot where his father was to die. So that is to really be the last thing that we're to really see, besides Murdoch and Foggy going back to this coffee shop to think that Elektra is going to show up again, but she's not. And so Foggy asks Murdoch, hey, how's it going? How are things? So we have this whole real last narration, and supposedly Ben Urich is going to reveal that Matt Murdoch is the Daredevil, and he gets to the point where he's going to say it on his letter, and eventually he's going to either print or delete all of it, and he ends up deleting all of it. Ben Urich walks out to see Daredevil kind of at this one part of the building where they're kind of to see one another, and Urich is like, go get him, Matt. And so Daredevil runs off to eventually go and sling his way through the buildings and so on and so forth. So I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.